In a serene evening that had enveloped the local police station, Officer Ronald was counting down the moments until he could leave the demands of his job behind after an exhausting shift. His body and mind were weary from navigating a maze of challenging situations throughout the day. "Just 30 more minutes," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the clock that adorned the station's wall, longing for the comfort of his home. His colleague, Officer Mark, shared this sentiment, both yearning for the respite that awaited them after a day filled with unpredictability and stress. Their job, after all, was never devoid of surprises. However, with merely a quarter of an hour left until their shift concluded, an unexpected call punctured the quiet that had settled over the station. Ronald's heart sank a little, weighed down by fatigue. "What now?" Mark voiced out loud, a hint of weariness in his tone, as he activated the speakerphone. The voice that came through was one they hadn't anticipated, a young boy, his voice quivering with fear, pleading for their immediate assistance. Please come quick before he comes back," the boy implored, his words sending a ripple of alarm through the officers. Ronald and Mark exchanged looks, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Calls from children were rare, and the palpable fear in the boy's voice ignited their concern. "We're on our way, kid. Can you tell us where you are?" Ronald's voice was steady, trying to offer some semblance of comfort. The boy hastily relayed his address, fear lacing his words. "My dad, he'll be here soon." "I'm scared," he uttered before the line went dead. Without a moment's hesitation, driven by a deep sense of duty and concern, the officers grabbed their car keys and dashed towards their vehicle. "Let's go, this boy needs us," Ronald declared, a firm resolve in his voice. They propelled their car through the silent streets, the quiet of the night juxtaposed against the urgency of their mission. Ronald was consumed by a mix of apprehension and determination, the night's calm shattered by the pressing need to ensure the safety of a frightened child. "Let's hope we get there in time," Mark expressed, his thoughts mirroring Ronald's worry about what awaited them. Ronald nodded, his mind teeming with questions about the boy's distress. As they neared the destination, the anticipation built. They braced themselves, prepared to confront whatever situation lay ahead, their primary focus on safeguarding the young boy who had reached out to them in his moment of fear. Upon arriving, the scene that greeted them was beyond what they had imagined, moving them to tears. The reality of the child's plea for help was stark, and their timely response underscored the unpredictability and profound impact of their roles as officers, ready to serve and protect even in the face of their own exhaustion. Yet, the night was far from devoid of surprises, and for the two dedicated officers, it was clear that their accumulated years of service on the force would be put to the test once more. Upon their arrival at the location provided by the concerned young boy, they were immediately enveloped by an overwhelming sense of abandonment. Before them stood a decrepit house, its windows shattered and the paint flaking away, as if the very building itself was lamenting its forsaken state. Could this possibly be the correct location? Who could find shelter in such a place? Mark couldn't help but express his astonishment. Ronald, with his 15-year tenure as a seasoned officer, replied with a somber tone, "Sadly, not everyone has the luxury of choice, my friend." Without hesitation, the officers exited their vehicle, their senses heightened and vigilant as they approached the forsaken structure. Their firearms were drawn, pointing ahead as a precautionary measure. "As we step inside, remain vigilant and keep your eyes peeled, Mark. The reality of what lies within is anyone's guess," the veteran officer advised with a grave tone. Upon entering, they were immediately assaulted by the foul stench of decay, rotten food and refuse had accumulated to an appalling degree. "This is beyond repulsive," Mark exclaimed, visibly disturbed by the severe lack of hygiene, each step revealing further evidence of utter destitution and despair. "It's hard to believe," Ronald voiced, his features twisted in a mix of revulsion and apprehension. He then softly called out for the boy, "Kid," but was met with silence. Proceeding with caution, they explored the ground floor, where every room they entered was a mirror of the same tragic neglect and impoverishment. The filth suggested either years of abandonment or a complete disregard for living conditions. As they ascended the creaking staircase, a stark contrast awaited them on the second floor. In a house marked by desolation, one room stood out as though it were a beacon of hope amidst the gloom. Impeccably tidy and clean, it was as though this room belonged to another world entirely. A beautifully crafted wooden bed sat at the center, adorned with pristine sheets that starkly contrasted with the layer of dust that had settled on the furniture elsewhere. The curtains, though aged, were whole and allowed the gentle glow of the moonlight to illuminate an orderly space. The room featured a carpet with elaborate designs and vivid hues, a splash of color in the otherwise dreary environment. An inviting armchair sat in one corner, accompanied by a stack of newspapers, suggesting a semblance of normalcy and comfort. What an anomaly, it's completely at odds with the rest of this place. Someone definitely calls this room home, Ronald observed, his gaze sweeping over the clean, maintained room. Adjacent to them was another door, sealed shut. The officers raised their voices, calling to the child once more, and their words reverberated through the quiet of the home. "Are you there, kid?" they inquired. After a moment, a weak reply came from behind the locked barrier, "I'm here, I'm here." The voice of the young boy was filled with fear and desperation. "We've come to assist you, is it possible for you to unlock the door?" Mark questioned. However, the boy confessed he was unable to do so. The officers shared a look of concern and immediately decided to force entry. With a firm thrust, they broke through the door, which flew open with a loud crash. But the sight that greeted them inside the room froze them in their tracks, presenting a scenario they were utterly unprepared for. The shock of the discovery rendered them speechless, with Ronald's heart pounding as he tried to make sense of the scene before him. The younger officer was similarly taken aback. What they encountered in that locked room was an unforgettable horror. A young boy, merely 7 years of age, was found shackled to a bed by his ankle, his face streaked with tears of both relief and fear. "My God, what has happened here? Who could subject a child to this?" the elder officer murmured, his voice breaking upon witnessing the young boy's plight. The boy's eyes, wide with terror yet flickering with hope, met the officer's gaze. "Don't worry, we've got you now," Ronald assured him, moving closer with caution to avoid startling him. He bent down to inspect the chain as Mark went to retrieve a tool to sever it. The elder officer, a father to a 10-year-old boy himself, was deeply moved by the harrowing sight, feeling a surge of emotion. How could anyone inflict such cruelty on their own child, he pondered, struggling with the mix of anger and sorrow overwhelming him. The boy appeared frail and underfed, his body bearing the marks of severe neglect and abuse. His ankles, bound by the chains, were wounded and bruised, and his small form bore evidence of physical violence. Trembling and tearful, the boy's distress was compounded by the grime on his face. Eventually, the boy was liberated from his chains when Mark retrieved a saw from their vehicle. The boy, still in tears, sought solace in Ronald's embrace. Just then, they detected sounds from below. "It's him, my father." "Please, hide," the boy whispered, his voice laden with dread. Yet, before the officers could respond, a man erupted into the room from the darkness, screaming and advancing towards them with unseeing rage. A fierce and urgent confrontation broke out. The individual, appearing to have lost his senses, launched an attack on the officers with unbridled aggression. Shortly after, a young officer adept in jiu-jitsu managed to subdue the assailant, grounding him with a well-aimed maneuver. "Need backup," Mark bellowed, ensuring the assailant was securely held down. Ronald, clutching a young boy, dashed towards the vehicle to summon additional support. In no time, the premises swarmed with law enforcement, leading to the apprehension and subsequent detention of the boy's father at the station. Ronald's attention turned to the boy, who was visibly in poor health, exhibiting clear signs of neglect and exposure. He fetched his jacket from the car to warm the boy, comforting him with, "You're in safe hands now, don't worry," as he draped his jacket around him. In that moment, the man felt a surge of emotion, proud to have shielded the innocent. The relief of rescuing the child was tinged with worry for his future. The officers were aware of the challenging path that lay ahead for the boy, after enduring such trauma from those meant to safeguard him. As the boy was escorted for medical care, the officer pondered over what the child's future held and the sequence of events that led to this predicament. Yet, the overarching question remained, what truly transpired? This was a question he hoped would find its answer in a brighter tomorrow for the brave young survivor. The harrowing tale of J.N., the 7-year-old discovered in chains, started with his mother's untimely demise due to a chronic cardiac ailment, entrusting him to his father, a man battling his inner turmoil. Following his wife's death, Liam was engulfed in sorrow, rage, and an escalating mental instability. His behavior turned increasingly volatile and erratic, casting a shadow of dread and unease over the child. "I must keep you safe, John. You can't abandon me like your mother did," he would often declare, his words heavy with a twisted mix of affection and delusion. As the situation deteriorated, the young boy, desperate to flee the terror within those walls, attempted to escape multiple times. Upon realizing his son's efforts to flee, the father resorted to a drastic measure. He shackled his son to the bedpost to keep him from running away. "You can't leave me, you're all I have left, son," he whispered, securing the chain around his son's ankle. The boy endured days of hunger and chill, confined to that solitary room. His universe was restricted to those 4 walls, his only companions being the toys his mother had once gifted him, now tattered from 2 years of imprisonment. On an occasion when Liam, slightly inebriated and careless, came to deliver some food, his cell phone slipped from his pocket unnoticed as he bent over. J.N. swiftly seized it, concealing it within his clothes without his father's knowledge. Later, Liam, sprawled in his immaculate, orderly room, realized his phone was missing. Baffled and tipsy, he assumed it was lost somewhere on the streets. "Damn it, now I'll have to get a new one," Liam grumbled, oblivious to the fact his son now possessed the old phone. J.N. noted that his father often spent hours out drinking, sometimes not returning until the following day. Seizing his opportunity that night after hearing the door slam, indicating his father's departure, J.N. retrieved the hidden phone. With shaking hands, he dialed the police, knowing this was his only chance for rescue. "Please come quick, before he comes back," J.N. implored on the call, his voice laden with urgency, fearing his father's return before the police's arrival. The relief and gratitude that washed over him when the officers liberated him were immense. His courage in making that call was going to alter his life's path. Now, in the police car, with an officer by his side, he dared to envision a brighter future, one devoid of the shackles and fear that had characterized his childhood. That evening, after uncovering the desolate house and rescuing John, Officer Ronald faced a predicament. With no safe haven for the boy and the guardianship council unable to act until the next day, he felt a paternal urge to help. "You can stay with me and my family today, little buddy. What do you think?" he proposed kindly, and John looked up at him with eyes full of gratitude. Upon their arrival at Ronald's home, John was introduced to his family. Ronald's 10-year-old son, Lucas, was thrilled at the prospect of having John around. Having always wished for a sibling, Lucas viewed John's arrival as a chance to finally have a companion his age. "Son, could you find some clothes for our guest, please?" Ronald's wife requested, eager to make John feel at ease and welcome. Lucas excitedly dashed to his room, selecting the nicest clothes he could find to offer John. The youngest member of the household was eager to ensure his newfound companion felt at home. At the same time, the officer's spouse took it upon herself to care for the young guest, providing him with a warm bath and making sure he was well fed. As the evening unfolded, a new friendship blossomed between the boys. Lucas introduced John to his world of favorite video games, exchanged stories, and even shared his toys. Lucas's happiness was palpable, and despite John's previous ordeals, he began to reveal a timid smile. Ronald observed the burgeoning friendship with a heart full of mixed emotions, joy intertwined with concern. He recognized the impermanence of the current arrangement yet harbored a deep desire to offer John a forever home. In the days that followed, Ronald reached out to the Guardianship Council, advocating for John's stay at their home while awaiting the resolution of his father's case. The social workers, upon their visit, were struck by the seamless integration and apparent joy and security John felt in this nurturing environment. "He's a perfect fit here," remarked one of the workers, observing him play with Lucas. Time passed, and as the legal proceedings involving John's father dragged on, the bond with Ronald's family only deepened. John, who had arrived scared and reserved, now frolicked and laughed alongside Lucas, embodying the essence of a long-standing family member. When the court ultimately ruled that John's father would be stripped of his custodial rights due to neglect and abuse, Ronald and his wife had already solidified their decision. They convened with the family, their gazes filled with love and anticipation, and Ronald, with a voice tinged with hope, posed the question, "We want to adopt you, buddy. What do you think?" John, moved to tears by the gesture, met their gaze, his eyes brimming with emotion. Ronald and his wife hung on his response, their own eyes moist with tears, yearning to provide John with the love and stability he deeply deserved. Without hesitation, John accepted their offer, embracing his new family wholeheartedly. This moment marked the dawn of a fresh chapter in John's life, one filled with the promise of love and safety. The definitive incarceration of his biological father, convicted on charges of abuse and neglect, meant John would no longer have to endure the presence of the man who had brought so much pain into his life. Instead, he was enveloped in the warmth and support of Ronald's family, who eagerly offered him the affection and security he had always yearned for. In the ensuing months, John seamlessly transitioned into his new life. He and Lucas, now brothers in every sense of the word, forged a bond that was both strong and enduring. They shared adventures, learning experiences, and grew together in brotherhood. Lucas became the sibling John had always longed for, and to John, Lucas was the peerless friend and ally he had never known. "You're the best big brother in the world, Lucas," John would often exclaim, his heart overflowing with joy. Their parents looked on, their hearts filled with a profound sense of happiness and achievement, witnessing the beautiful relationship between their sons flourish. Opting for the path they did turned out to be the correct choice, and witnessing the remarkable transformation of the small boy who had arrived in their lives under such distressing circumstances became the most profound reward they could ever hope for. "We definitely made the right call, didn't we?" Ronald remarked to his wife as they observed the children frolicking in the garden. His wife nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "He's brought an immense amount of happiness into our household. It feels like he's been a part of our family from the very beginning," she responded. As time progressed, John started to heal from his previous traumas through therapy sessions and the unwavering love showered upon him by his new family. He gradually became more open, each day learning to trust and share his feelings more freely. With every day that passed, John appeared more joyful, more self-assured, and more settled. The day the adoption was officially recognized, marking John's permanent inclusion in the family, was one filled with jubilation, shared embraces, and tears shed from sheer happiness. John's smile that day was one of relief, a sense of security, and a feeling of true belonging. "Thank you for choosing me, Dad," he expressed gratefully to Ronald, who had once served as a policeman. The narrative of this little boy and his new family turned out to be a miraculous testament, showcasing to all that even in the most shadowed circumstances, there's always a possibility for light to pierce through and bring about profound change. After watching this story, how do you feel? Then there is another story about Valentina. Let's continue. Valentina found herself on duty at the hospital, navigating through the quiet of the night shift when suddenly, the piercing sound of alarms jolted her into action. Peering through the window, she realized the urgency of the situation. The narrative you are about to read unfolded in Chile, a few months back. It was shared with us by an individual recounting a poignant chapter from her life, a narrative tinged with sorrow, illustrating a predicament that could befall anyone. In the year 1995, Valentina was navigating the final year of her high school journey. During this period, she experienced her first brush with love, falling for a boy who, in a twist of fate, left her side as he moved abroad with his family. A mere 2 months post their separation, amidst the academic year, Valentina was besieged by a suspicion that she might be pregnant. This revelation left her in a vortex of worry, confronted with a reality she had never anticipated. Initially, Valentina was at a loss, uncertain about her next steps and apprehensive about breaking the news to her parents, known for their stringent demeanor. The gravity of her situation made silence a temporary refuge, yet she was aware that concealing such a truth was a fleeting solution. They were bound to discover her secret eventually. She confided in a close friend, expressing her fears and uncertainties. "Do you really think you're pregnant?" her friend inquired. "I haven't taken a test yet, but something feels off," Valentina replied. Her friend promised to procure a pregnancy test for her, a gesture that brought a glimmer of hope that perhaps it was all a misunderstanding. However, the test confirmed her fears. It was positive. Mixed emotions engulfed Valentina as she wandered through Valdivia's streets, tears blending with an emerging resolve. Amidst her turmoil, she found an inner strength and determined. I need to face this head-on. I'm going to bring this child into the world. Returning home, she was met by her mother's questioning gaze. Why are you only getting home now? It's way past your curfew. Choked by tears, Valentina managed to utter, Mom, I'm pregnant. The revelation was met with disbelief and a stern slap from her mother, who mistook her words for a distasteful joke. The situation escalated when her father entered, inquiring about the commotion. With trembling voice, Valentina admitted to her reality. The reaction from her parents was one of anger and disappointment, culminating in the harsh declaration that she was to terminate the pregnancy. You have brought shame upon us, were the cruel words that echoed in the ears of the 16-year-old, marking a profound moment in her life. The following morning, Valentina was roused from her sleep by her mother at the crack of dawn. Together, they embarked on a journey, boarding a bus under the cloak of early morning. Mom, where are we headed? Valentina inquired, her voice tinged with fear. She vividly recalls the dreadful weather that day. A relentless rain coupled with a biting cold enveloped them. After journeying for 2 hours, they reached the quaint town of Los Lagos. Puzzled and anxious, Valentina pressed, Mom, why are we here? Her mother's response did little to ease her worries, just trust me. You're not ready to shoulder the responsibilities of a child. It's time to put an end to this situation. Valentina's fear escalated, Mom, you're frightening me. I can't go through with this. Please, let's leave, or you'll regret this forever. Despite her pleas, they proceeded to enter a nondescript house. Inside, they were greeted by a man who seemed to be a doctor, as inferred from the medical diplomas adorning the walls, proclaiming his qualifications. This man, advanced in years, sought to reassure her, there's no need to fear. I'll just need to conduct a preliminary examination. He guided them to a modestly furnished office. Valentina's mother, with a sense of urgency, inquired, Doctor, is it possible to proceed? However, you must be aware of the risks. An abortion, especially at her young age, could result in infertility. She might never be able to conceive again. Wouldn't it be wiser for her to carry the pregnancy to term and then opt for adoption? The doctor hesitated. Confidentiality is your concern, I understand. But does she consent to this? The question was met with a veiled threat from the mother, consent will be given. Valentina, overwhelmed, could only lower her gaze, a silent testament to her lack of choice. The doctor, firm in his stance, declared, I cannot proceed. Her youth and the potential consequences weigh heavily on me. My advice is to consider adoption. Thus, Valentina and her mother returned home, seemingly with fate intervening on Valentina's behalf. The sorrow of realizing her parents' intentions weighed heavily on her. Upon their return, they explained to Valentina, you will bring this baby into the world, but thereafter, he or she must be given up for adoption. Time marched on, and 8 months and 2 weeks later, Valentina found herself in a hospital room, laboring to bring a new life into the world. Thankfully, the delivery was a success. It's a gorgeous baby, remarked the nurse. At Valentina's request, she was briefly allowed to glimpse her son. However, this moment was fleeting as her mother promptly presented her with documents to relinquish her parental rights. Sign this, her mother insisted. If you refuse, you're no longer welcome at home. Despite her heartache, Valentina complied, believing it was in the best interest of her child. She signed, haunted by the memory of a unique mole on his skin, a trait they shared. Her mother expedited the process to irrevocably sever the bond between Valentina and her son, her own flesh and blood, her grandson. In the aftermath, Valentina was engulfed by a profound depression. Despite her desperate attempts to reconnect with her son, all avenues led to dead ends. She was left in the dark, without any clue as to his whereabouts or well-being. At the first light of dawn, Valentina was gently awakened by her mother. Together, they embarked on a journey shrouded in the quiet of the early morning, boarding a bus while the world around them was still asleep. "Mom, where are we going?" Valentina asked, her voice carrying a note of trepidation. She could still vividly remember the fierce weather they faced that day, a persistent rain and biting chill wrapped around them. After a 2-hour ride, they arrived in the picturesque but unfamiliar town of Los Lagos. Confused and filled with unease, Valentina asked, "Mom, why are we here?" Her mother's answer did little to calm her nerves. "Just trust me, dear. You're not prepared to take on the responsibilities of a child. We need to resolve this situation." Valentina's anxiety spiked. "Mom, you're scaring me. I can't do this. Please, let's go back, or you'll regret this forever." Despite her protests, they made their way into an unassuming house. Inside, they were met by an individual who appeared to be a doctor, as evidenced by the medical degrees that hung prominently on the walls, attesting to his expertise. This elderly man attempted to calm her. "Don't be afraid. I just need to do a basic examination." He led them to a simply decorated office. Valentina's mother, with a note of urgency, asked, "Doctor, can we proceed with this? But you must be aware of the risks. An abortion, particularly at her young age, could leave her infertile. Might it not be better for her to continue with the pregnancy and then consider adoption?" The doctor paused. "Confidentiality is important, I understand. But does she agree to this?" The mother's response was a thinly veiled threat. "She will consent." Valentina, feeling powerless, could only avert her eyes, her silence a clear indication of her lack of agency. The doctor, maintaining his ethical stance, stated, "I cannot go forward with this. Her youth and the potential risks are too significant. My recommendation is to think about adoption." Consequently, Valentina and her mother were left with no choice but to return home, with destiny seemingly intervening in Valentina's favor. The realization of her parents' intentions weighed heavily on her heart. Upon arriving home, they explained to Valentina, "You will have this baby, but afterwards, he or she must be given up for adoption." As time progressed, 8 months and 2 weeks later, Valentina found herself in a hospital room, enduring labor to bring a new life into existence. Fortunately, the birth was successful. "What a beautiful baby," the nurse exclaimed. At Valentina's insistence, she was allowed a brief moment to see her son. This moment was ephemeral, as her mother quickly handed her documents to sign away her parental rights. "Sign this," her mother demanded. "If you don't, you can't stay with us." Despite the pain it caused her, Valentina signed the documents, believing it to be in her child's best interest. She signed, forever haunted by the memory of a distinctive mole on his skin, a trait they shared. Her mother quickly took steps to irreversibly cut the ties between Valentina and her son, her own flesh and blood, her grandson. In the wake of these events, Valentina was consumed by a deep depression. Despite her fervent efforts to find her son, every path led to a dead end. She was left without any information about his location or how he was faring. Observing the scene unfold before her, she witnessed paramedics hurriedly transporting an injured individual. It marked the first instance where she was engulfed by a profound sense of dread, compelling her to approach the scene. There, she was met with the words, "This man has suffered a hit. Immediate action is crucial." Valentina drew nearer to the injured man, and upon laying eyes on him, the peculiar sensation she felt intensified. Time seemed to freeze, yet she was acutely aware that every second was precious. She sprang into action. The man's chest was exposed, revealing a mole on his skin that struck a chord of familiarity with her, for she bore a similar mark, akin to one her father had. Miraculously, the man survived the surgery, though he remained under medical supervision. While the doctor was momentarily preoccupied with another patient, curiosity got the better of Valentina, compelling her to inquire about the man's identity. To her astonishment, they shared the same surname. Compelled by a need to know more, she accessed the hospital's database and uncovered that he had previously been admitted and was an orphanage resident. The revelation was astounding to Valentina, leaving her in disbelief. She vividly recalled the moment. "I delved into the computer, searching for any records related to him and stumbled upon numerous details. Being employed at a public hospital granted me access to additional information. My hands trembled. The pieces were falling into place, the resemblance to my father, the mole, his orphanage background. Could he be anyone but my son? It felt as though destiny had orchestrated our meeting. I was torn between tears and laughter, facing my son in such a dire state. Yet, I saw this as a second chance life had offered me. I was determined to seize it, to make amends for my past mistakes tirelessly. My shift was nearing its end, but I yearned to return to his side. So, with a heart full of resolve and a newfound purpose, Valentina made her way back to him, eager to embrace the opportunity to reconnect and heal the wounds of the past. Emerging from the depths of the intensive care unit, a nurse approached me with somber news that pierced through the veil of hope I had clung to. "The patient has succumbed, he didn't survive," she informed me, her voice a quiet echo in the turmoil of my thoughts. Disbelief shackled me for a moment before I propelled myself through the door into the room where my son lay. Around him, my colleagues stood, futile life-saving equipment scattered nearby, a stark reminder of the battle lost. As I gazed upon my son's still form, a doctor approached, his words heavy with sorrow. "It's tragic, he couldn't fight any longer. An orphan, with not a soul in his family to mourn him. Who will shed tears for him?" Those words struck me with the force of a tidal wave, nearly toppling me, but I steadied myself against a nearby table. In that instant, as the room emptied, leaving me alone with my son, a deluge of grief overcame me, and I wept as I never had before, for the young man before me was my child. Subsequently, the bitter truth surfaced: the driver responsible for my son's demise had fled the scene. Revelations unfolded that he had been celebrating his college graduation, his judgment clouded by alcohol, oblivious to the tragedy he was about to cause. My heart ached further as I learned more about my son's life. He had spent his childhood in an orphanage in the northern part of the country, moving to the capital for his studies, supported by the state. A kind-hearted and diligent student, my son had his entire future ahead of him, only for it to be cruelly snatched away. I couldn't help but torment myself with thoughts that perhaps his life would have been different, happier, had I not relinquished him for adoption. He was only 24 when his life was tragically cut short. Since that day, I've been unable to speak of my parents. The resentment towards them festers within me. Despite their advanced age, reconciliation seems beyond reach. They stripped me of a significant phase of my life, the joy of motherhood when it was due. The guilt gnaws at me relentlessly, pondering over the countless moments he might have needed me, the times he might have cried out, questioning why I abandoned him. Perhaps he even sought to find me. Given our shared surname, it wouldn't have been a daunting task, yet I remained elusive, and now, the opportunity for reconciliation, for sharing my love with him, has been irretrievably lost. His death signifies the end of a chapter in my life, leaving an indelible mark of sorrow. Despite being blessed with a daughter and a husband, the shadow of guilt and loss looms large, altering my existence irreversibly. Thus concluded Valentina, wrapping up her narrative, a tale that might have veered off into a different direction, perhaps towards a more favorable outcome. Life, as it turns out, has a knack for springing surprises on us when we least anticipate them. In contemporary times, it's become rather commonplace for parents to resort to punishment when their offspring err. This approach, however, is fundamentally flawed. Being human inherently means being fallible, and oftentimes, we're swept up in the heat of the moment, leading to mistakes. Instead of reprimanding, what Valentina's parents should have prioritized from the get-go was offering their unwavering support. By failing to do so, they've inadvertently distanced not only their granddaughter but also their daughter. That's all about our story. If you like this story, please like and subscribe, and see you in the next story.